1 o'clock, we'll go ahead and get started, and welcome those that are still making their way through lunch. My name is David Hall, and I'm co-presenting today with Kel Van Zoon, who is, I'll let him introduce himself, but my background is in both systems science and organizational psychology, and we're here to have a conversation about collaboration in the workplace, and specifically making some connections with lean as a way of approaching doing business. So,
thanks, Dave. My name is Kel Van Zoon. I'm a lean business consultant. I used to own a business called Plywork in town here. We were a small manufacturer of an eco-conscious product. During that time, I got into both sustainability thinking from a whole systems perspective, and then I got into lean, and they kind of like fit very nicely in my mind, and became much more interested in that overlap and that whole idea than I was in running my business. Which is challenging to say the least, and became a full-time lean consultant last year after selling the business. So I've been working with Dave for a while on working together, and we talked together for the first time really last week, and this is our second time, so the week before last.
yeah.
I'm also part of Lean Portland, and as part of Lean Portland, there's two other presenters here as well, Matt and Brian, who are going to be doing part 2 of this workshop. We'll talk more about that later. So yeah.
Yeah.
Moving swiftly on because we only have an hour. Dave is not monitoring. I know that's what it says. I mean, moderating. That's not what it says. That kind of was a mistype. Brian and Matt are not involved in this one, which it also did say, but they're doing the next one, so please come to them.
And we're not involved in that one.
And however, shameless plug, they're going to be doing the next one. So if you like this one, definitely come to the next one. So.
Yeah, before we continue, we want to take a moment for you to meet the people sitting next to you. So we're only going to give you a tight 30 seconds on this, and I don't want to yell over you. So I'm going to raise my hand.
I'll yell.
Don't yell. I'll be raising my hand quietly. If you see me raising my hand quietly, please raise your hand quietly and stop your conversations, and we'll see how quickly we can then get quiet again together and come back to continue. But 30 seconds to introduce yourself to those in your immediate vicinity.
10 seconds, not bad.
Okay, thank you. I'm a little inspired here too. I know we're right after lunch, and so energy can be a little bit low, and to try to raise the energy a little bit, as well as just get you to intimately know your neighbor on another level. We'd like to have you find one other person that's sitting right next to you, or behind you, or something like that if you have to, and we're going to thumb wrestle. Right? So we're going to give you 1 minute to thumb wrestle. Again, like really tight time on this, so don't start until the 1 minute has started. Because the challenge here is to score as many points as you can. And of course, you score a point by having one person's thumb pinned by another person's thumb for a count of 3 seconds, right? That's scoring a point, okay? So give you just 10 seconds to find somebody without talking, just kind of like eye contact, okay? And then we're going to time you 1 minute to score as many points as you can by pinning each other's thumbs, all right? So, ready, set, go! And so I like to hear like just some numbers, shout them out, how many points you scored. Maybe just one.
We tied at 2-2.
2 to 2. 2 to 2.
50.
50.
30.
30. Wow, are these just like totally imbalanced competitions over there?
That's not a mathematically possible. Scoring things differently.
Say again?
I said maybe people are scoring things differently.
Okay. So I think 50 and 30 are both mathematically impossible. In 1 minute.
15 and 15.
But
Not if you're sharing victories with your partner.
right, so you have to count for 3 still, right? But can you demonstrate for us? Maybe you're going to look at it.
1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
So, in other words, you collaborated.
They're married.
So,
It's the one time we collaborate.
So notice that when I phrased it up front, I just said score as many points as you can. I didn't say that as an individual you need to score as many points as you can, I just said score as many points as you can. So you can interpret that in 2 ways. But because we have this mental model about what it means to thumb wrestle, it's in our mind, it is an exercise in which we attempt to impose our will on somebody else. And it is a competition. In our understanding based on our cultural associations and upbringing. And so we bring this kind of mental model into a lot of our everyday exchanges, including in the workplace. And so what we're going to talk about today is how to recognize opportunities for collaboration where if we work with one another, we can actually score more points or we can be more successful than if we bring into the conversation or into the workplace the challenge that we're dealing with, an assumption that we're dealing with a situation that involves competition. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Kel. He's going to talk a little bit about lean, what it means by lean, and then we'll be making the connections between lean and the more general idea of collaboration in the context of work.
Okay, so yeah, in your minds we're going to take a little bit of a left field step here. What is lean? Bear with me. Dave, your thing's not working. No? There we go. It's also known as Agile, Six Sigma, Lean Startup, Continuous Improvement. You may have heard of any of these. They all stem from the same root, which is lean. Where am I supposed to be pointing this? Brief history, Henry Ford, we've all heard of this guy here. He started this idea when he first built the first ever car in production. The idea that he was building one at a time, so single piece flow we call this now in Lean, and he was having parts being delivered to the car as they needed to be put on just in time. And he did that by method of having gravity chute. So they build the parts upstairs, send it down a gravity chute downstairs, and it would arrive pretty much just in time to put on the car. It was very revolutionary. It meant that the throughput, the output of the cars was very fast. And this was great when he was just building one car that only came in one color and one model. Taiichi Ohno, who was over at Toyota, read about this and was very interested. And he came to America to come and look at Ford and said, wow, this is really interesting. I think we can use this because we're not having a very good time after World War II. And he came here and he found out Ford wasn't doing that anymore. And instead they'd gone to big batch production and he saw a lot of waste. So he came back and he started kind of rethinking what Henry Ford was doing in the beginning and then how they could adapt that, and he started adapting it. We'll switch over quickly to this guy. So he was an engineer, statistician, and consultant, and he was pitching the idea in America to the auto industry after World War II of using data to make data-driven decisions. You know, kind of a unique idea at that time, I guess. They didn't want to listen to him. They were like, what do you know? You're not a businessman. We're making as much as we can and people are buying it. Go away. So then he went to Japan because he was hired to do the census there, and he pitched his ideas to the Japanese auto industry. And they loved it. They thought it was so good that they created what they called the Deming Prize, which Toyota went on to win in 1955, I believe. And when they won that, what they won it with is what later got known as Toyota Production System, which was in the 70s, when they finally wrote a book about it, which is Taiichi Ohno's book. And then this guy, who's from Portland, decided to start a company called Productivity Press, and he published the first ever book that Taiichi Ohno wrote about Toyota Production System. That then brought Toyota's production system to the West via Portland, which is really cool. Yay us. And he then published a whole slew of other books about lean, and over time, Toyota's production system, over time then, other people started taking notice and writing about it, and in 1990 they published a book, and that's when they coined the term lean. So it had already been around for, roughly, let's have a look, 55 to 90, that's 35 years before lean was ever coined that way. And the guys who did coin it that actually sorely regret it because it doesn't have a very good connotation. I think agile is much better. If you have the agility to be able to change, when the change happens, then you're going to be able to have a much more successful organization. Total side note, Lean Portland, who we're all a part of here, we're going to be interviewing this guy. He's still around. He's 85 now. We're going to interview him in December about his time with Taiichi Ono and W. Evers Deming and what they were like and how that was like. So if anybody's interested, go check out leanpdx.com. Okay, lean has a bad reputation. Why? Well, it has a bad reputation because something was lost in translation. So when it came to the US, there's two things that are very different about the US than Japan. Number one is you can't just, in Japan, you can't just lay people off, okay? It's very, very difficult to lay people off. Taiichi Ono talks about this in his book. Not because he wanted to, but because he was just saying it's very difficult to lay people off, so you don't want to lay people off, so what do we do instead? You've got to keep them employed, but do it in a way that's significant and makes sense. It's adding value for the customer, not just, oh, go clean that corner because you're employed. The other thing that was lost in translation is that the culture in Japan is just very different than the culture here. So the business culture there is very different, and leadership is very different, and respect for each other is very different. So when they came here, none of the culture was translated, right? Hence the workshop title, Culture, Culture, Culture today. And so we had Lean come here, and often it was used as a tool to just create incredible efficiencies, and then what you do with those efficiencies, you slice off the bottom. You take a whole bunch of people and get rid of them. So it has a bad reputation, and it should have a bad reputation for that, because it's used like that. But that's not really lean. So what is lean? It's a holistic systems approach applied to any organization. So that's a for-profit, non-profit, government, business, doesn't matter what it is. Your own home is an organization. Two people or more owning a home or working together or being roommates is an organization. That organization has information coming in and going out. It has materials coming in and going out. There's people going in and coming out. Their time and energy, right? And then there's cash. And that's pretty much it. Then there's one last thing that comes in and out of all of this. Reality. Come on, reality. Not cooperate.
That's reality.
That's reality. I didn't do that on purpose. So reality comes along and it screws up all your best ideas, right? And it leaves in this track a lot of big problems. Oh, yeah, and another shameless plug here. If you want to learn more about what these problems might look like, come to our second part. So your organization, after reality comes in, is all over the place. Information is not flowing smoothly. Materials are not flowing smoothly. People's time and energy is not used in a good way. And cash is not flowing smoothly. So you've got these problems, you say, I'm going to go lean, right? And then you go lean, and then you're going to come and say, oh my God, we went lean, and now we've got all these problems. And what you really did is you expose the problems, and that's what lean does. It exposes what we like to call the opportunities. And then you start fixing those opportunities, and you fix them, and you fix them, and you fix them. This thing has like a delay of several seconds. And then once it's fixed, you kind of get to this point where you have a nice little status quo where you reach it, where you can't really fix everything because things are constantly changing, reality is constantly coming in, people are coming and going in your organization, cash is going up and down, your customers are changing, your entire existence for being there is changing. Lots of things are changing all the time. So you get to a point where you kind of reach a state of equilibrium, and then it gives you the opportunity to start working on the external. You start working with your customers and your vendors and your strategic partners in town, and you talk to them about how you can work together better. And then you kind of start reducing those things, and it starts moving out all those information, material, people, and cash flows even more. So that's kind of lean in a nutshell. So you get to this point where you're lean, right? So lean consists of theory, which they're going to talk more about, and lean consists of tools, which they're also going to talk more about. But that is not really what makes lean lean. If you do this, it's kind of like sustainability, no offense if anybody's from Nike, versus sustainability at Patagonia, right? At Patagonia, it's all about the culture. And that's what you need to do. If you want to be a truly lean organization, you have to start with culture. Hence this workshop, Culture, Culture, Culture. And I think think that's you, Dave.
Oh, we have
We got a few more slides here. God, this thing is so slow, it's so annoying. So one of the tools we depend on for culture, we call it the 5 whys in Lean, which basically says that, I'll practice on Dave. Dave, why is the slide deck not working?
I don't know,
Why do you not know?
because I'm new here.
Why are you new here?
Because I didn't arrive early enough to figure out the problem.
Doesn't feel good, right? It's easy for Dave, like, he's really good at this stuff, but like most normal people outside of Dave would be like immediately, like straight away, like, oh my God, walls are up, what the hell, I'm being attacked, defense, right? So although Lean has this great idea for problem solving and root cause analysis, that's 5 why. Keep asking why to get to the root of the problem. But if you don't have a culture to support that, then this tool is useless, because people are just going to put their walls up and that's it. This is a great little quote I read about Lean, which is Lean is not a productivity model, it's an employee engagement model. This is a big player in Lean who wrote about this. And then this is Tai Chi himself. He said it's about respect for humanity. Most of your waking life is spent at work. So if you can't have input on how you do your job and do it better, then people are disrespecting you. They're disrespecting humanity. Okay. And here today.
Yeah, let's take a step back then and ask this question. What is culture? Well, for starters, it's alive. So the word culture derives directly from the Latin cultura, which means to cultivate. So we're dealing with a living system. When we step into an organization, either that we're a part of, or that we're new to, or you're a consultant for, having that respect for it as a living entity that has survived as a living entity up to that point, and to give it that respect. And to understand that when we try to intervene in living systems, they tend to respond in unpredictable ways. And you can't impose change on anything that's living. But you can create different conditions. You can change the environmental context to promote a certain pattern of life that might emerge from that living system. And also recognizing that we are a part of it, too. We are agents within that system that have the opportunity to exert some influence and help to cultivate the different patterns of behavior that we'd like to see within that system. So with that kind of awareness of it as living and approaching it with humility is really important. Now, without going too far down an academic rabbit hole, a little definition here from Edgar Schein, the organizational theorist, on what culture is. And I like this definition because it takes away a value judgment of what culture is and focuses more on the fact that the pattern of shared basic assumptions, values, and behaviors and artifacts that the group learned and adopted as it solved its challenges of external adaptation, so adapting to an environment, and internal integration, how people work together within that context, that has worked well enough. So it's worked well enough that has enabled that group to continue to persist over time. So it's worked well enough to be considered valid, and so therefore taught, often implicitly, to the new members as the correct way to think, feel, and relate, behave in relation to those challenges of external adaptation and internal integration. So when you step into an organization that maybe has some, from outside observer point of view, some dysfunctions, they're not quite reaching all their sustainability standards. There's some other performance indicators that are lagging, as well as there's some tension, there's some conflict throughout the organization. Well, things have still been able to persist. The organization is still around. People are still employed. And so things are working well enough that a lot of people say, okay, well, this has helped us, this culture that we've developed has carried us this far. And so they're often, unless they're in an absolute crisis mode, not always prepared to confront whether or not what they're doing is actually working well enough. So I like this definition, again, because it takes away the value judgment of it's the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do, and just recognizing that they're doing those things because it's worked well enough. So within Schein's model, there's this onion concept of those shared patterns of assumptions, values, and behaviors. Processes is used here as opposed to artifacts. So this is from visible to less visible. Right? So the things that are visible on the outside, we can actually see people's behaviors, we can see the artifacts like all the equipment and all the materials, the clothing that we wear, those are visible to us. We can see our patterns of behavior, how we go through the motions of our everyday life, as well as the organizational workflow and processes. Those are observable. At the deeper core of that, there's assumptions, there's beliefs that are often that we're not actively conscious of, like the thumb wrestling example here, where you didn't question the assumption that thumb wrestling entailed a competition where you were supposed to impose your will on somebody else. So those assumptions that are deeply seated powerfully drive the other layers, and particularly the outward visible behaviors that we see. So we'll talk a bit more about assumptions in a bit, well, actually right now. Within our culture, we have a number of assumptions. We'll focus on this theme of competition here. So there's this famous phrase, nature is red in tooth and claw, and this came about, this idea was utilized as an expression to capture Darwinian thought and like the notion of the survival of the fittest, and organizations were kind of going through the industrial paradigm and adopting that, and we have elements of the mechanical worldview where nature can and should be exploited. All these cultural changes overlaid together to help create the very economic paradigms that we are still largely participating in. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here because many of you are at the forefront of changing that paradigm, but we still shared in our culture have these deep-seated assumptions that the life in general, and then by extension, the business world and organizational life is one that's fundamentally competitive at its core. But if we start looking for cooperation, we start to see it. And science has been doing this more and more in recent years, and everywhere we look, we find that, hey, there's some more cooperation. The bees and their capacity to create a hive, of course, is not the product of any one bee doing anything by themselves. So it requires a collaborative effort. Research showing that trees are not just competing for light, they're actually underground through their roots. And with fungal connections, they're sharing literal resources. They are distributing resources as needed, as well as information that enhances the overall resilience of the forest stand. And then, of course, with people, to deny our cooperative tendencies as a social species is to deny the great achievements that we've been able to do, whether that's crossing the Pacific, or it's creating institutions like this building, GoGreen Conference. Look at the incredible degree of cooperation that's happening here today, where you're all behaving so appropriately for this kind of a setting. And so we are deeply cooperative. And it's not that competition isn't a part of reality as well, but we live in a culture that has overemphasized the competitive aspects of our nature, and at the expense of honoring and cultivating the cooperative tendencies we have. Really quick, you might be familiar with McGregor's theory X and Y, back to assumptions. So one theory is based on the assumptions that workers are inherently lazy and they're only showing up for work because they get a paycheck, and you need to use a carrot and stick management strategy to get them to do anything well. And so to do their job well, you reward them for good things, and then if they do something wrong, you punish them. Right? So that's theory X in an absolute nutshell. Theory Y, on the other hand, believes that people are intrinsically driven to work, like they enjoy work, that they get meaning and satisfaction out of it, and they can be trusted to do their job under less supervision. And then theory Z, which is less well known, was by a Japanese fellow, Oichi, whose name I'm probably butchering. His work is based directly on Deming's 14 points, which was one of the gentlemen that Kyo was speaking to earlier. So this theory Z kind of takes some ideas of theory Y a step further and talks about making a commitment to the employee for life and caring for their well-being and seeing them as more capable than maybe they're even aware that they're capable of, and investing in them so that they have full knowledge of the organization, that they can step into a lot of different roles, and that they can actively make decisions about the organization's future direction. So which is right? These are different theories, which is right? Well, it turns out it depends on the assumptions of management. if you go into an organization and you assume theory X and you govern by that way, people will manifest those behaviors. If you assume theory Y and manage in that way, people will behave in a way consistent with your assumptions. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now there's some argument about some workplaces, one management style being more appropriate than another, but in general, the lesson here is that the assumptions that we bring to the table help create the conditions and help manifest the behavior that can then reinforce those very assumptions. So, sometimes it works quickly, sometimes there's a little delay. There we go. Back over to Kiel, we want to make a connection between this idea of theory Z and more deep employee engagement with some of the philosophy of lean.
Yeah, this is really just a real quick, basic, looking at like the traditional organizational structure. When I say traditional, it's like pyramid, right? Top down. That's what we're used to, what most of our organizations operate under. So you have like different departments, and then you have a fearless leader at the top who will turn up any moment. There you go. Who's a leader, director. And then you have the people who are working directly under her. There they are. This is so slow. And then you have the department managers. And as soon as you get department managers, you start getting all these walls going up, right? It's like, oh, this is my department, throw it over the wall, their problem now, all right. And then you've got people working in the departments that don't even really talk to the people up there or in the other departments. And then you've got the people at the bottom. Now, in Lean, what we like to say is this is where the value stream is. This is where value is created for the customer. The customer doesn't care what's happening up here. They care about getting their product. And your product could be anything from like getting your shopping list done because like, you know, you need to go get food for the stores to feed your family. Or it could be as complex as like, we've got to go through this extremely difficult bureaucratic task to get a law passed. All of those like have an end customer and they have people that feed into that. And vendors could be providing information or cash or materials or also like people to help out. Strategic partners who are bringing people in. There's a lot of volunteers who come in today and help out and make this happen. They're all vendors as well. And then there's the people here at GoGreen who are adding value. Now, you guys don't care that somewhere at some point someone made a decision like, okay, we're going to have the GoGreen Conference and it's going to cost this much. You don't care about that. All you care about is turning up and having an awesome conference. Obviously, like if the price can be less, that's always nice, right? But the point is that like all of the value-added parts of the GoGreen Conference are happening kind of the grunt work at the bottom, as we like to think of it. Now, in a lean organization, what we're saying is because the value is there, this person is as far away from understanding how the value is created as they could be, which means that these people are the most important. So it turns that whole pyramid structure upside down. So what you get to when you have a truly lean organization is you get more into this kind of thing where you break all these barriers down between departments, and everybody up here is a coach, mentor, servant to the people below them, or to the side of them, however you want to look at, to the center here, as it were, the value stream, so that you're serving the customer as much as possible. And it's a very, very different organizational model, not one we're used to, and not one that exists too much yet, but there are ones out there who are kind of trying to do this.
Oops. So how do we create a culture of collaboration? I think the last slide. Yeah. How do we cultivate that? So how do we engage our employees more fully? How do we create the conditions in which that is the pattern that we see within our organization? Really quickly here, I always think it's valuable to recognize our embeddedness. So we as a society are embedded within Earth. Our community and our organizations are fully embedded within society. As individuals, we are embedded within organizations, community, family, etc. And then, of course, as individuals, we have embedded within us a set of assumptions, values, behavioral tendencies. And each one of these raises different questions that suggest different opportunities for how we can collaborate and how we can intervene and create different conditions. And I don't think the answer is comes from any one level. It's a matter of taking a more holistic systems approach and recognizing those opportunities for intervention at different levels. So we're going to focus, of course, more here at the organizational and individual level. And I think it's most important to start with ourselves and recognize that we, be the change in the world and blah, blah, blah. That wonderful Gandhi quote. So we need to understand how we are perpetuating the patterns that we might not like in our own workplaces. So in terms of knowing ourselves, recognizing that we are susceptible, and as well as everybody around us, to different degrees of impression management. In case you can't read it, the dog on the computer here is saying on Facebook, 273 people know I'm a dog. The rest can only see my limited profile. So particularly in the workplace, we don't bring our whole selves. We put on masks, we put on presentations. Like I dressed a little bit nicer today for this, to present myself in a way that generates a different perception. We do this all the time, and it's valuable in one sense, but it can actually interfere with organizational learning in some important ways. So we do this self-protection by not wanting to look ignorant. We don't ask questions. We don't want to appear weak, so we hide our vulnerabilities. We don't tell people what we need or what we're not particularly good at. And we don't want to look incompetent, so we don't admit mistakes. Now I know this doesn't apply to you, right? Be aware of the not me fallacy. So we tend to not recognize our own susceptibility to these kinds of these behavioral patterns. We're all guilty of it to varying degrees. I'll just take the admit mistakes one. So if you make a mistake and you have an opportunity, like there's like a 15-minute window before anybody else is going to find out, you're going to scramble to try to fix that mistake before anybody finds out, right? So we will do our best to be able to deliver ourselves and deliver our work to the world, whether the world's our coworkers or it's some outside customer. We do our best to do so in a way that makes us look good. And there's good rationale for that. But if we obscure and we hide the fact that mistakes and we have vulnerabilities and that we don't know certain bits of information, it stifles information flow and prevents learning from happening at its optimal level. Some other socialized tendencies that we have is that we don't want to be intrusive into other people's, into their own little silo. It's not my place, so we don't offer ideas. We also don't want to be negative, so we don't criticize the status quo unless we're talking to somebody with whom we trust. And then, so we have those backroom conversations about it, but we don't have a real honest public conversation about it. So, question is, for you, how psychologically safe is your work environment? So this concept of psychological safety has been shown to be a major predictor of organizational performance, as well as employee satisfaction and long-term commitment to an organization. And so some questions for you to reflect on is, in your workplace, the overall pattern, what's the willingness of people to ask questions? What's the willingness of people to just yeah, that's my bad, admit mistakes? What's the willingness of people to offer ideas and to challenge the status quo? Right? So just move on to practice here. Now, we've had an opportunity, we've broken the ice a little bit, I hope, by having you meet some neighbors, as well as to do a little thumb wrestling together. So let's practice on this. And before we practice, I do want to say that I understand that we don't really know each other that well, and I'm not going to presume that we have a high degree of psychological safety established here. So only share to the extent to which you are comfortable, but I encourage you to be honest and to be comfortable to the extent that you can, sharing something with your neighbor. So we'll just do a quick pair up, and when you're hearing somebody respond to you, don't feel like you need to go into troubleshooting mode or solve their problem for them. Just listen with compassion and empathy, and we're only going to give you 30 seconds to a minute here, so you won't have an opportunity to really resolve it. This is just about practicing naming things and hearing yourself out loud communicate with somebody else and being on the receiving end and hearing somebody and not reacting with judgment and just appreciating the fact that they're open with you. All right, so first question here is just share a mistake you've made recently. Bravery points if nobody else in the world yet knows about this mistake. So I'll give you 30 seconds to a minute here. And again, I'll do the hand raising thing to try to get us to be quiet and come back together. Didn't it feel good to get that off your chest? So there's really something to like talk therapy, without making the argument for why we should all have counselors. I want to say that being able to open up and share with other people is well documented to help reduce our own stress levels. I had a mentor who said he didn't believe in karma. It was more like he didn't know if karma was a real thing, but he did believe in a form of karma, and that was that we all live with our own psychic reality. So we have our own knowledge, our own experiences, and if we've made a bunch of mistakes and they're kind of like these little skeletons in our closet, we're carrying that around with us, right? And so if we can just be like, you know what, yeah, I made that mistake, and it eases our own psychological burden that we have to carry with us. Right? So this next one, if you want to really go to the full invitation of it, can be a little more challenging. This is about vulnerability. So sticking with your same partner, I'd like you to share something that you feel vulnerable about. Another way of phrasing this is something that you feel like you need support in. Right? You recognize in yourself that you don't have the skills, or you don't have the ability, or the knowledge, or maybe even just the time. Well, that's too easy of a one. So, but something where you kind of recognize for yourself like a personal weakness. And I'm going to start by giving my own example. And that is, I spent most of my adult life in academia. And very few people know that I'm actually mildly dyslexic. And so it forces me to spend a lot more time reading. Like, I'm just a really slow reader and processor. And that has been something that's been very difficult for me to be successful in that realm. And so that's something that I feel very vulnerable about, especially when people assume that, like, here, haven't you read this article, this news research? And I was like, there's a lot coming out. I have not yet. So that's my own personal vulnerability, just as an example. So again, to the degree that you're comfortable sharing with this person next to you, something that you feel vulnerable about in your life. Another minute. Before we move on, if you can just thank the person next to you for being open and sharing with you. Okay. So, if we want to create an organizational culture in which there's a higher degree of psychological safety, what can leaders do? We can have deep conversations on each of these. I'm just going to run through it, and I'll say that. So Kiel and I offer a workshop in which we can take a half day or even a full day, and we dive more deeply into this and do some other exercises and processing. But in general, like, what can you do as a leader? And recognizing you are a leader, whether that's structural leadership because you have a position of power in your organization, or just personal leadership in that you influence those around you by role modeling your own behaviors. So, for one, is to just impart trust. So remember back to theory X and Y and theory Z. Theory X assumed that you cannot trust people, and so you have to create this really controlled, regimented environment. Versus theory Y, trust people more and creates conditions in which people are free to make decisions, including the possibility of making some mistakes, and trust them. Not necessarily to do everything right perfectly, but trust them to learn over time, especially if we're committed to them as a human being over the course of their entire career, as opposed to just thinking of them as an employee that's with us at that moment in time. So impart that trust and be prepared to let people surprise you. And then lead by example, acknowledging your own fallibility. So particularly from somebody who's in a true leadership position, this one can be powerful because leaders have been the ones that are best at that impression management oftentimes. They've been able to work their way up the hierarchy, and they've done so by hiding mistakes or and really presenting themselves as somebody who's really knowledgeable. But if as a leader you acknowledge the fact that you don't know you don't have perfect knowledge and you're not able to monitor everything, and to tell your employees, tell your colleagues that, hey, please keep me informed. I might miss something. I'm going to be doing this. Please, if you see a mistake, pointed out for me, acknowledge your own fallibility. Something I've started doing at the university when I teach a class is I'll introduce the syllabus and I'll say, here's the syllabus, I've made a mistake somewhere. I don't know where it is, so please bring it to my attention. And it creates a little bit more of a humanness, and there's a lot of, like, that environment, there's a lot of stress that students bring in, like wanting to be perfect, to make sure everything's like, all their I's are dotted and their T's are crossed all perfectly. And so to acknowledge that we're all human helps create an environment in which people feel a little bit safer about their own fallibility. And then to ask questions too. So again, sticking with leading by example, so conceding like, hey, you know more about this than I do. You are on the ground floor. You're the one that's creating value for the customer the most. You see the process day in and day out. You know more than I do, and ask questions and do your best to learn from people that you're working with. Did I skip one there? I think it jumped past, yeah. So then frame work as a learning challenge. So instead of saying, let's make this target of reaching X number by X date, that creates a stressful conditions. Now people are scrambling to reach that goal, as opposed to framing work as an ongoing learning challenge. Saying, hey, we're doing this, we have this opportunity, let's see how good we can get at this process. It's just a much more inviting, it's much more inviting for employees to engage in something where they know that they don't have to get everything right or meet some arbitrary deadlines and some arbitrary targets, which results in people kind of making shortcuts and in the end often not producing the highest quality work that they could have. Versus if it's an ongoing learning challenge, you're continuously improving how you're doing things. And then welcoming failures. So when mistakes do happen, what can we learn from this? An example comes to mind. I suspect some of you know Sam Blackman, who recently passed away, CEO of Elemental, and he was amazing at this. His ability to be open when mistakes were made within the organization and to support people when those mistakes are made as opposed to punish them. So, sorry, Sam was a friend of mine and a great leader that we lost in the community. And then create space for dialogue. So oftentimes we don't actually process conflict. We have a quick conversation, we push it under the rug, or we don't have the conversation at all. So actually really going out of your way to create a healthy space in which disagreements, different points of view can actually be processed in a healthy, meaningful way. When you're having those conversations, it is valuable to establish some norms, some shared expectations around how to engage in that conversation. Here's a set of shared expectations that I've developed over the years, pulling from different sources. Living room conversations have another really great set. You can look up living room conversations. So it's not like one set is the end-all be-all. Some are more appropriate for some organizational contexts than others. But this gives you some shared framework by which you can hold each other accountable to the quality of the conversation that you're having that is more likely to result in conflict resolution or new insights as opposed to maybe perpetuating some of the interpersonal challenges that you're experiencing. In general, what we're going for here is moving from judgment to curiosity, from disagreement to shared exploration, from defensiveness to self-reflection, and then moving from our assumptions driving our behavior to asking questions and trying to learn more deeply about ourselves and the workflows that we're a part of. So we want to make some connections back. I'm approaching this from a background in organizational psychology, and I'm still learning about lean, but it's really clear that there's very explicit direct overlap, and so the word of lean speaks about a lot of these same concepts, just with some different language. So give the floor back to Kel to talk about this
Yeah,
slide
so
here.
these are some posters that I actually have that I produced for like my clients, and they're really to kind of like, how do you build what we call a Kaizen culture? Kaizen means continuous improvements, or I like to think of it as continuous incremental improvements, because change happens slowly, and it's best to do things in smaller increments than try and expect a huge big thing to be done in one go. So how do you build this culture? Well, no blame, only opportunity. We don't blame each other for things that go wrong, because when something goes wrong, you expose an opportunity. You're exposing what we call a waste in lean. And by exposing that waste, that means that you can now fix it, so it doesn't ever come back again. If someone hides that because they're scared to be blamed, then it will come back again and again and again. So we don't want to have people feel blamed. We only want to have opportunity. So that's why it's so important within a lean organization, especially that leadership is bought into it. I work with small organizations. I should say smaller. I mean, some are hundreds of people, but the point is that I always work with leadership first because I have to have them buy in. There's no point in me going to work for them if leadership's going to turn around and go, oh, you screwed up, I'm going to fire you, or you screwed up and now you feel bad. It doesn't matter. You cannot blame people, otherwise they will not learn. The only way to get better at something is to keep making mistakes. It's true, right? If the first person who tried to create an aircraft, crashed and failed and then gave up on the whole thing, then we wouldn't be flying now. So, next one, bad people versus bad process. So they've done a lot of research. Deming was one of the people who did most of this research, I think. Over the years, the decades of having implemented lean and him just looking at lots of different processes through lots of different organizations, how often when something goes wrong, is it a mistake of a person versus a process being bad? He determined that around 94% of the time, it's a person. No, I'm kidding. 94% of the time, it's a process. But think about it, right? You're stuck in traffic. Do you ever blame the process? We're pissed at other people. So we're pre-programmed. That's not one of those assumptions. We assume that it's a person. And this often comes in. Well, actually, I'm not going to say anything about that because these guys are going to say something about that. Thank you. Okay, so no competitors, only collaborators. Competition, as we showed with the thumb wrestling game, is not always a good thing because it brings the wrong assumptions. Think of from a lean perspective, we want to all be doing the same process because between 10 of us, we can come up with a better process for doing something than one person, right? One person cannot send someone to the moon. Lots of people can, working together. So if you have people competing with each other, but they're not going to have as good a product. If you imagine Russia and America working together on a space program versus competing with each other, I actually think they would have done a better job. So the idea is, no competitors, only collaborators. So the idea of a sales team where people will get bonuses based on how many sales, I think that's a really bad idea, personally. You can't do it, or can't do it versus can't do it yet. If you say I can't do something, you're closing that box, you're closing the thinking, you're done. It's not thinking outside the box. In order to be able to change something and have continuous improvement, you want people to be consistently thinking outside of the box. What if we did it this way? So you can say, well, we can't do that yet. And you're like, oh, okay. Or, well, we can't do that yet, but what if we did? What would that look like? And then it might get you to something you can do now. Fear of failing. You have to, be okay to fail. You have to be okay to be able to fail. Your leader should allow you and encourage you to fail to a certain extent, because that's how you learn.
So quick revisitation of this idea that we are systems embedded in systems. We've been talking a bit about that individual level. I just want to make explicit the opportunities for making connections at the organizational level and the structure, how is your organization structured. The reward systems, for example, are you rewarding people for their individual sales? Is it commission-based? I've been in enough different hardware stores to be able to tell the difference of when they have a sales or a commission-based sales versus not commission, because on the commission-based, they're eyeing for you, and then they're kind of looking over who's the next customer that's more likely to spend more money, and so it just creates a very different environment, both for the customer as well as for those employees. So looking at the alignment in your organizational structures, and then also, just since this is PDX Go Green, also thinking about, are we collaborating with Earth? Are we collaborating with the processes and the opportunities that Earth affords, or are we exploiting its wonders? And then really quickly on this organizational level, the shared purpose too, why do we exist? And there's a lot of great evidence showing that organizations that are truly purpose-driven engage their employees more effectively, as well as attract a more committed customer base. And so reflecting on that, and having that shared purpose is important, a purpose that's worthy of people's life energy, but it's also not sufficient. Right? So, for example, you can put people in a rowboat and you can have the shared purpose of we're going that direction. But if people are not on the same page about how you're getting that direction and their behavior isn't sensitized to the behavior of those around them, then the boat can go all askew, right? Even though people in their mind are trying to move in the same direction. So, without going really into it that deeply, the importance of cultivating systems thinking, recognizing that our individual behaviors contribute to the whole, and even if we have these siloed divisions, what happens in one silo certainly affects and impacts the experiences that people are having in other silos. And so getting people to have an understanding about how their own little wedge, their own little perspective on the whole contributes, and designing for the whole system as opposed to within those individual silos. And back to the example that Gil had given about the 5 whys. So 5 whys is about root cause analysis, getting beyond the symptoms and understanding like more fundamental root cause. And once we've established a culture in which people feel it's okay to admit mistakes, there's not blame, you're more orienting on the system that we're all part of, and like, oh gosh, like why is it that we're all still stuck in traffic? Or why is it that this kind of problem and like this defect in this product that we're producing occurs again and again? Is that somebody's fault? No, it's something about the system that we've co-created together, and directing our attention to how can we change that system in a way that creates a better experience for all of us and produces better outcomes. So, quick big picture view, establishing shared purpose, cultivating the trust and psychological safety, meaningfully processing conflict, focusing our attention on the system as opposed to individual behavior, and then, of course, celebrating success, which I haven't spoken to yet, but just having some fun, acknowledging when people do things well and collaboratively together. I don't think I forgot we were going to give a round of applause to the thumb wrestler champions of the room, so nice job. So yeah, just acknowledging when when we are having successes together. So, did I skip one? No. Yeah. So some next steps. If you're interested in learning more about this, so this is largely focused for Lean. I don't know if you want to say anything more about this, Kjell, but in general, like Lean as a philosophy as opposed to a set of tools can be adopted and implemented in really any organizational model. There's a lot of great books out there. We have a resources page coming up in a
Skip the
minute.
next one, actually.
Just jump ahead to the next one.
Yeah, so like lean.org is a great organization where you can read a lot more about lean. I think so Gamble Walks is a great book if you're interested in implementing lean. And then Reinventing Organizations is a great book that kind of talks about culture. It's nothing to do with lean actually, but I think if you want to build a culture that is a culture of collaboration, this is a great book to give you some inspiration. There's a podcast as well, This American Life, that's fantastic. LeanPDX.org, that's the organization that the 3 of us are part of. We have a meetup group, we have a LinkedIn group, and we do community consulting for nonprofits. Any nonprofits here? You guys want to do Lean? We do it for free for you, so contact us. Vanzone.com is my website, and cpartner.com is Dave's website as well. And if you want to go to the next slide. Another shameless plug, go to theirs. And next slide.
Who are these guys standing behind you?
Matt and Brian, can you quickly stand up?
Yeah, stand up there.
So they're doing in the same space here, part 2, looking more deeply at some of the.
And that'll be in exactly 17 minutes, so we've got 2 more. Dave, you got some workshops?
Yeah, so I work at Portland State, but I also have a professional practice. I offer workshops on this very topic, and then also more in depth on systems thinking, as well as facilitation skills training, and then do kind of more standard organizational development and sustainability consulting, as well as facilitation itself.
And I myself, I'm an independent consultant as well. I do workshops, facilitation, and leadership coaching. I do a lot of leadership coaching. I've been a self-employed most of my life, and I've had businesses most of my life where I had employees. So I've been a leader for a long time, so I understand like the pains of being a leader versus somebody who's an employee, which I've also been. and like how you have to make that dynamic work. We offer free workshops. Myself and Brian, and actually Dave is going to be doing one of this soon, and Mike Mercer over there. Mike, put your hand up. Hey. Mike is doing a workshop on free workshop called Behavior Change, which is going to be in December. If you go to my website, vanzonen.com, you can look up the Eventbrite pages. We do these every month. We have free lean workshops. We have behavioral change workshops. We're going to be doing a culture workshop, lots of different ones. So, and then next slide, I think. Oh yeah, one big thing I'd love to ask of you guys, huge favor. If you could take a scrap piece of paper and on one side write down one thing that you loved about this workshop, and on the other side write down one thing that you think we could do way better at, then that would be awesome. And just leave it on the table here. What was that?
Or even just a little bit.
Or even just a little bit. Is there another slide, I think? Or no?
No, that's it.
Okay.
Do we have any more time left?
No, we're done.
We're happy to hang out if you want to snag a card or ask us any questions.
Yeah, we'll be here for the next 15 minutes until the next workshop, which is going to be part 2. So thank you so much for coming out.
Yeah, thank you.